Hey guys, tonight we travel back to the 13th century to a time of incense-thick chapels, sun-scorched battlefields, and truly unfortunate fashion decisions. You're going to Egypt not on vacation, but in the company of King Louis IX of France. He's got a sword, a dream of reclaiming Jerusalem, and yes, he's wearing wool. You, poor thing, are wearing it too. It itches. It chafes. It does absolutely nothing to cool you as the Egyptian sun leans in like a curious baker peering into the oven. You trudge along the Nile Delta. Your boots too heavy, too. French sink slightly with each step. There's dust in your eyebrows, and you've had nothing to drink in hours but warm wine that smells faintly of raisins and desperation. Louis is ahead of you, radiating saintly conviction, his white cloak fluttering in the breeze like laundry someone forgot to take in before a storm. You're trying to stay awake, mostly because the thought of falling into a trench filled with medieval latrine runoff is less appealing than the smell of your travel companion's foot wrapped in linen situation. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Tell me your location and what time it is right now in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Louis IX isn't just any king. He's the king who would one day be canonized as a saint. He doesn't shout, he prays. He doesn't drink much, but he fasts a lot. He is, quite frankly, a man who thinks suffering is good for the soul. And you're starting to suspect this crusade might be the spiritual equivalent of a 40-day juice cleanse. But with swords and lice. This story begins with heat. Real physical heat, the Egyptian kind that wraps around your face like a damp towel. Louis, bless him, has insisted on traditional garb. Long sleeves, woolen underthings, and a cross stitched in gold over the heart. Not one piece of linen in sight. As you march, the air smells like sweat, horse, and the exotic spices Louis' supply officer packed far too much of. Cinnamon, clove, maybe a dash of regret. You think back to when you boarded the ship from Aigues-Mortes, a sleepy Mediterranean port, buzzing with the excitement of thousands of French crusaders convinced this trip would be glorious. The weather was fair, the water cool. You'd waved goodbye to common sense sometime between the third sermon and the fifth inspection of your boots. Even then, Louis had stood out not because of his title, but because of his composure. He prayed aloud on the deck, even as a sailor retched over the side. Everyone pretended not to hear the sailor. Historians still argue whether Louis's woolen dress code was a symbolic choice or a personal act of penance. Either way, it was definitely not a decision made by someone who understood the term desert climate. Even your helmet is hot, and it's mostly decorative. You adjust it anyway. The chainmail digs in. Somewhere behind you, a knight is singing the same hymn for the 12th time. Off key. But Louis keeps going. He's got a relic of the true cross around his neck, and what appears to be the entire book of Psalms memorized. Every hour or so, he stops to kneel and pray, face serene, while you try not to melt. It's endearing, in the way watching someone voluntarily hold their hand over a candle to prove devotion is endearing. The camp at night is quieter, though not much cooler. Tents flap. Dogs bark. A man, 3 tents down, won't stop describing, in vivid detail, the mold on his travel cheese. You lie on your cot, fanning yourself with a copy of Louis's favorite devotional text and wondering if sainthood is contagious by proximity. By day, you walk. Louis insists on walking too, though his advisors beg him to ride. Christ walked, he says. You try not to say, yes, but Christ wasn't wearing chainmail and didn't have gout. A mosquito lands on your nose. You swat it and accidentally slap yourself. The landscape is bleached bone and scrub. Occasionally, you pass locals who regard you with a mix of pity and suppressed laughter. Children point at your armor and giggle. You consider waving but realize your gauntlet is stuck to your palm with what might be prune juice. One afternoon, you witness something both absurd and oddly touching. Louis stops in the middle of the trail, eyes closed, and begins to chant softly. His soldiers pause. A hush falls over the column, and then a dust devil rises in the distance, like the desert sighing. You watch it spin, twirl, and vanish. Louis opens his eyes and nods, as if that counts as divine approval. You suspect it might have just been wind. There's a quiet companionship among the rank and file, though. You swap stories with a cook who claims to have once served garlic soup to a bishop's horse. A young squire tells you he's here to impress a girl back home. A priest lectures you on humility while adjusting his gold-threaded belt. You almost ask if that's ironic, but bite your tongue. Literally. The dust has made your lips crack. You fall asleep that night with your feet still buzzing from the march and your dreams full of mirages, shade trees, cold fountains, linen tunics that breathe. When you wake, Louis is already praying. You wonder what drives him. Glory? Faith? Guilt? Historians still debate whether he truly believed God wanted this crusade, or if he simply couldn't shake the idea that kings were supposed to be warrior saints. Maybe he thought he'd fail without enough suffering. Either way, he's suffering plenty now. You both are. But he hasn't lost his sense of purpose. He speaks kindly to soldiers, shares his water, insists on eating the same stale bread as the lowest-ranked footman. It's hard not to respect him, even if you'd prefer to do so from a shady bench in Paris. As the sun sets on another scorched day, Louis kneels beside his tent and murmurs a final prayer. You do the same partially from piety, mostly because you've heard there might be cold melon slices at the mess tent tonight. You still itch. You still sweat. And you're still very much in Egypt. But something about this man, this king in wool robes, marching ever forward into the unknown, makes you believe, if not in victory, then at least in the strange, stubborn dignity of trying. You remember Louis as a boy now well. You weren't exactly there, but in this slow, sleep-soaked remembering, it almost feels like you were. Paris in the early 13th century is a smoky, jumbled cluster of sounds and steeples. Markets clatter, Latin prayers echo off cathedral walls, and tiny Louis is learning how to be holy and royal, which is sort of like learning how to juggle incense burners while walking a tightrope. He's the son of Blanche of Castile, a queen who does not mess around. While some mothers tell bedtime stories, Blanche lectures Louis about her favorite saints. She prays for his soul, his bones, and his future crown. She also makes sure his tutors are the sort who assign things like, read all of Augustine twice and then quiz him after Vespers. You sit on a wooden bench beside young Louis during one of these lessons, pretending to listen while sneaking a bite of honey-soaked bread. He's busy copying out a psalm in painfully neat handwriting. You're busy wondering if anyone ever gets to play with a ball around here. The answer is no. No, they do not. Louis grows up in a palace that smells like beeswax, cold stone, and whatever is cooking in the buttery below. He watches knights practice swordplay in the courtyards, but doesn't show much interest. What he does show interest in are relics, bits of saints, scraps of holy cloth, anything that once belonged to someone whose name now graces a basilica. He collects them like some kids collect shiny rocks. Except Louis gets a whole chapel built to house his shin bones and thorn fragments. Historians still argue whether this deep piety came from genuine faith, courtly performance, or maternal guilt trip strategies honed to weapon-grade levels. Probably all three. But by the time he's crowned king in Rheims in 1226, Louis was already being whispered about as the most Christian monarch in Christendom. You can practically see the halo forming. As king, he doesn't exactly lighten up. He fasts. A lot. Sometimes just bread and water. Sometimes less. He also wears a hair shirt under his royal robes because apparently silk and gilt don't mix. He passes laws against blasphemy, usury, and badly behaved nobles, which makes him incredibly popular among peasants and slightly less popular among everyone else. You're with him one night in the royal chapel. He's kneeling, of course in deep prayer, while you're half asleep on a bench carved with fleur-de-lis. A page comes in with news. A Muslim sultan has attacked Christian, held land. Louis doesn't panic. He doesn't even blink. He just keeps praying, then murmurs, "We go." This is when the crusade begins, not on a battlefield, but on a polished stone floor, with candlelight flickering across the face of a man who seems very much like he'd rather convert the world with kindness, but is willing to do it with an army if needed. Planning a crusade is not, as you may imagine, a quick task. It involves an alarming number of parchments, lists, and solemn arguments over exactly how many barrels of salted fish it takes to keep 15,000 men spiritually nourished and not riddled with scurvy. Louis calls together his advisors, bishops, and a few slightly hungover knights to make the arrangements. You sit in on one meeting where a cleric suggests the king bring a large crucifix to inspire the troops. Louis suggests bringing two, just in case. At some point during these discussions, someone mentions Egypt. A bold target. Not Jerusalem, not even Syria, Egypt. The breadbasket of the Islamic world, home to the Nile, strategic ports, and cities full of palm trees, and people very unlikely to welcome French wool. You cough quietly. Wool, you say. In Egypt? Louis doesn't answer, but you see that look. The one that says, God will provide comfort, not linen. You wonder if God might consider also providing some shade. Evenings at court are a mix of diplomacy and solemnity. Louis spends hours talking with scholars and scribes, hammering out documents that begin with, "In the year of our Lord," and end with, "So help me God." He funds hospitals. He sends out clerics to gather support. He organizes masses to bless the expedition and asks his mother to rule France in his absence. Blanche, by the way, is not thrilled. She's not exactly unthrilled either, but her expressions mostly involve tight lips and the occasional exasperated sigh that says, "Really? Egypt? In wool?" You prepare your travel kit, a sword, a tiny icon of St. Michael, and a thick notebook full of prayers in Latin that you don't entirely understand. Louis hands out crosses to everyone going with him. They're stitched, red, symbolic, and not particularly helpful in battle unless flung with great force. One morning, as the sun filters through stained glass and onto the stone floor like melted jewels, Louis walks barefoot into the chapel and swears a vow. He will go. He will lead. He will wear wool. And he will do it all in the name of Christ. You, being somewhat more practical, swear a vow to pack extra water skins and maybe smuggle a linen scarf into your saddlebag. Preparations stretch on. Ships are ordered from Marseille. Quartermasters panic over boots. Monks chant. Noble posture. You spend 2 days watching two dukes argue over whose banner should fly closest to the king. Louis settles it by assigning equal distance, and then moving his tent to the middle of the field, which causes them both to sulk. The people of France are divided. Some say it's madness. Others say it's glorious. A few say it's typical Louis. All agree that it'll be hot. One knight, newly knighted and excessively enthusiastic, decides to train for the heat by sitting in front of a blazing hearth for 3 hours. He passes out. The king visits him with water and prayers. You bring a fan. There's a quiet moment. The night before departure, when Louis walks alone through the silent courtyard. The moon is out. The stars are unbothered. He gazes up and whispers something you can't hear. You want to believe he's speaking to God, or maybe to the future, or maybe just wondering if anyone remembered to pack the holy water. You sleep that night with your travel pack beside you. You dream of golden deserts, of ships with flapping sails, of wool robes that miraculously don't itch. In the morning, you ride out behind your king. And though you're not quite convinced this crusade will end in glory, you are convinced of one thing: he believes. And somehow, that makes you want to believe too. There's a thing no one tells you about crusades: not the preachers, not the scribes, not even the kings with shiny swords and firm convictions. It's mostly logistics. You imagine grand charges and blazing banners, but the first few months are actually just lists. So many lists. How many oxen? How many monks? Do we bring the really big tent? Or the slightly smaller, but still spiritually significant one? You are seated again on a carved wooden bench, watching as Louis and his advisors hunch over parchment scrolls. A scribe dips his quill. A bishop sneezes. And Louis, as always, looks serene, as though he's not about to drag half the nobility of France across 2 continents. "So," says one quartermaster, "we have 3,000 knights, 10,000 foot soldiers, 300 cooks, and, at last count, 7,421 communion wafers." "Not enough," Louis replies without looking up. "Double the wafers." You sigh. The man has priorities. You spend a good portion of the spring overseeing barrel counts. There's something mildly absurd about standing ankle-deep in hay while someone explains the spiritual benefits of brined herring. Louis insists every man, from lord to porter, have access to rations. It's noble. It's just also wildly complicated. Historians still argue whether this level of involvement, Louis personally inspecting the storage of candles, was about saintly discipline or just good old medieval micromanaging. Either way, he's there. Sleeves rolled up, pointing at crates of dried figs and murmuring blessings over cheese. Then there's the matter of sermons. Every few days, Louis calls an assembly. You stand in the crowd as priests rise, their voices echoing across courtyards and through cloisters. They speak of Jerusalem, of duty, of sin. You try to concentrate, but one sermon goes on so long your foot falls asleep. The bishop talks about the heavenly inheritance at least 16 times. Louis listens with a bowed head. You contemplate whether sainthood could be achieved through sheer endurance. Then the money starts moving. To mount a crusade is to open the royal purse and just pour it into the sea. Armories need replenishing. Ships must be commissioned. Horses, too many of which seem to develop sudden mysterious limps, must be fed, shod, and prayed over. You attend a blessing of the mules. One of them bites a friar. It's not considered an omen. To raise funds, Louis implements new taxes. Nobles groan. Merchants calculate. The poor, mostly, just noddist to being asked for things in the name of higher causes. Blanche of Castile, still holding the reins of France in Louis's absence, negotiates loans with Italian bankers. You meet one. He's very polite and smells like olives and subtle danger. In the palace halls, maps are unrolled. Egypt sprawls in ink lines and careful script. You trace the coast with your finger, noting how far it is from Jerusalem. "Shouldn't we go straight there?" you ask, only half joking. Louis's general, a grizzled man with eyebrows like angry hedgehogs, says, "If we take Egypt, we control the Nile. Control the Nile. We control trade. Control trade. We pressure the Sultan." You nod sagely and pretend you understand the math of medieval geopolitics. What you really understand is that you'll need more canteens. There's also a surprising amount of drama over the religious artifacts coming along for the ride. Louis insists on bringing the crown of Thorns, at least a very impressive portion of it safely housed in a golden reliquary. This prompts a debate over whether sacred objects should go into battle or remain in France. The argument lasts 4 hours. A monk cries. Eventually, the relics stay behind, but not before Louis has custom prayers composed. Just in case, you meet some of the other nobles joining the crusade. There's Jean de Joinville, an affable chronicler who smells faintly of ink and optimism. He takes copious notes. There's Robert of Artois, Louise's brother, who laughs loudly and seems allergic to humility. There's Alphonse of Poitiers, who tries to organize the troop assignments and keeps losing the paperwork. One day, a knight presents Louis with a newly forged sword, blessed by 3 bishops and rubbed with oil from a distant monastery. Louis accepts it, holds it to the light, and says, "Let it serve the Lord." You admire the craftsmanship. You also note it's extremely heavy. Your own sword is less impressive, mostly decorative. You name it, Mildred. It doesn't seem to matter. Packing for departure is a production worthy of a cathedral choir. Tents, food, religious texts, armor, ropes, lanterns, dried apples, extra wax for seals, parchment for scribes, spare banners for windy days. Everything must be accounted for. You overhear one knight asking if he can bring a pet hawk. The answer is yes, apparently. Another brings 3 musicians. One plays a hurdy-gurdy. You seriously consider sabotage. The final inventory includes over 100,000 horseshoes and precisely 26 bells for keeping time on ships. Louis insists the ships be organized according to saintly patronage. St. Peter carries knights. St. Andrew holds the hospital staff. You're on St. Bartholomew, which smells vaguely like fish and prayer. The weeks before departure pass in a blur of preparation. You're fitted for fresh armor. Louis gives a speech so moving that 2 cooks cry and hug each other. Masses are sung. Grain is bagged. Lists are checked, then rechecked by candlelight. There's a moment. One quiet morning, when you walk the harbor. Ships bob gently, sails furled like sleeping angels. The sea glitters. It feels peaceful, holy, almost serene. And then a stable boy drops an entire barrel of salted pork into the water. It explodes with a noise that startles a bishop into quoting Leviticus backward. The illusion is broken. But it's all part of the charm. Departure day finally arrives. You stand on the docks of Aigues-Mortes, watching as thousands of men board ships. Armored feet clanging, banners fluttering, priests chanting. Louis is the last to board. He turns once, looks back at France, and makes the sign of the cross. You do the same, though yours is a bit more hopeful than holy. The ship rocks beneath your feet. You grip the railing and realize, this is it. No turning back. Egypt awaits. And Louis, in his wool robe and burning conviction, is leading you right into the unknown. The entire kingdom of France is packed onto the sea. That's what it feels like as your ship creaks forward, sails groaning, ropes straining like old knees. You look around the deck of the St. Bartholomew and realize it's more crowded than the Paris market on St. Denis Day. Knights elbow past squires. Priests murmur prayers while sidestepping barrels of lentils. A chicken flaps indignantly from someone's arms. You're not sure whose chicken it is. It doesn't matter. Everyone is slightly seasick anyway. You lean against the railing and try to see the horizon. It's blue, endless, and deeply untrustworthy. Louis is on the flagship just ahead, standing tall in the prow like a woolen figurehead carved with purpose and fasting. He holds his psalter like a captain's compass. You squint and wonder if he's praying or just trying to ignore the sound of 30 knights retching in unison behind him. It's not glamorous, this voyage. The Mediterranean is beautiful. Yes, but it's also loud, occasionally smelly, and somehow sticky, despite all the sea spray. The ships are small, by modern standards. They rock constantly, creaking like they're composing a sea shanty just out of key. You sleep in shifts, eat hard biscuits that might actually be fossilized, and drink wine watered down so thoroughly that even the monks grumble. Water alone brings worms. One explains, solemnly holding his goblet. But this wine has character. You're not sure it has anything besides a suspicious aftertaste. Still, spirits are mostly high. There's an air of purpose. Jokes are exchanged, prayers whispered. One squire attempts to juggle 3 apples, then promptly drops all of them onto a passing bishop's lap. The bishop, by some miracle, laughs. Or perhaps just sneezes. The fleet travels in waves, sails stitched with crosses, flapping like saints' banners leading a procession of wood and hope. Occasionally, you spot a pod of dolphins. A knight insists, it's a divine sign. Another says, it's just lunch that swims. Historians still debate whether some crusaders truly saw omens at sea, or whether prolonged dehydration just makes clouds look like angels. Days blur into nights. The stars are endless, bright, and far more organized than your ship's supply situation. You hear arguments over salt rations. One cook insists on flavoring stew with clove and dates, which makes the entire row of knights ill. Someone accidentally eats the consecrated wafers during a midnight snack raid. There is a formal apology. The priest forgives, but quietly replaces the lock on the reliquary box. A few ships break away from formation in a storm near Sardinia. They return days later, slightly battered and full of fish stories that may or may not involve mermaids. Louis listens politely, then suggests a prayer of thanks and a small fast. You suggest they consider a nap instead. As the fleet sails past Cyprus, you dock for a brief rest and reprovisioning. You stumble onto land and immediately kiss the dirt. It tastes like dust and victory. Cyprus is warm, dry, and full of citrus trees. For a moment, you forget the campaign ahead. There's fruit, shade, and no one swinging a sword. Louis visits a local monastery, prays, and makes a donation large enough to refurbish the cloister roof. You buy a pastry that crumbles like angelic regret. Still, even here, preparations continue. Louis receives letters from Europe. His mother, Blanche, is doing her best to manage France. There's unrest, taxes, and at least one count who has attempted to claim a duchy by invoking a dream he had after drinking spoiled mead. Louis sighs, but doesn't flinch. Let God rule France while I am away, he says, and everyone nods like this isn't a terrifying idea. Back on the ships, the tone shifts. You're closer to Egypt now. The air smells different, sharper, more ancient. There's a growing sense of tension, like the sails themselves are holding their breath. Louis begins daily prayer sessions on deck. He invites everyone night. Cook, stable boy. You attend one and sit awkwardly beside a man who still has pigeon feathers in his hair. The sun sets as Louis recites a passage from Matthew, and for a brief moment, the deck feels like holy ground. Then someone sneezes loudly, and the spell breaks. Back to soup and snoring. The crusade isn't just a military effort, it's a cultural caravan. You notice this one night as a troubadour strums a lute while a priest sings a hymn, and a knight simultaneously attempts to teach his falcon how to bow. It doesn't go well. The falcon bites the lute, Everyone applauds anyway. Your own gear is holding up barely. Your boots have taken on the smell of old onions and seaweed. Your sword, Mildred, remains untouched. You're considering reclassifying yourself as a morale specialist. That mostly means you carry salted almonds and tell bedtime stories about Charlemagne. Louis is tireless. He holds meetings by candlelight, blesses the wounded, and reads scripture aloud until his voice goes hoarse. His devotion never wavers. You start to suspect he'd lead this crusade alone, barefoot, carrying nothing but a psalter and righteous optimism. One night, the wind dies. The ship sits still in the glassy sea. No breeze, no sound, just the creak of hulls and the occasional cough. You lie on the deck and watch the stars. Somewhere behind you, a monk sings softly. You fall asleep to the rhythm of the waves, the scent of salt and wool thick around you. Then, land. Egypt. A cry from the crow's nest. Sailors rush. Knights buckle armor. You stand, stiff and sunburnt, and see at Damietta, gleaming white in the morning haze. Palm trees. Minarets. A city that has seen crusaders before and, from the look of it, was not hoping to see them again. Louis clasps his hands. Deus vult, he murmurs. God wills it. You, quietly, whisper, please. He will also give us some shade. The beach looms. Boats are lowered. Troops prepare to disembark. And all around you, the air hums with a strange blend of anticipation and exhaustion. You're here. The wool is still itchy. Your boots still squelch. But the Kingdom of France has officially arrived in Egypt. The moment your boot hits the Egyptian sand, it's like stepping into a kiln, a slightly damp, unpredictable kiln that might also contain arrows. Damietta looms in the distance like a mirage someone tried to paint over with whitewash and defensive optimism. Palm trees sway just enough to tease you, and the Nile's mouth ripples nearby, reminding you that if you trip here, you'll fall into either history or a very fishy eternity. You look over at King Louis IX. His face is flushed, but resolute. His wool robe? Still intact. Still deeply, tragically wool. It clings to him like a prayer shawl. With boundary issues. He lifts a crucifix in one hand, blesses the sand beneath his feet, and marches forward with the confidence of someone who has not read the Egyptian weather report. Your landing is only mildly chaotic. Men leap from boats, some with practiced grace, others with the speed and finesse of laundry falling off a line. Shields clang. Horses scream. At one point, a cart filled with crossbow bolts flips, and you're fairly certain at least a dozen were retrieved solely because someone said, "Those were expensive." Damietta is not undefended, but it isn't eager to fight just yet either. The Egyptian garrison seems to be waiting, watching, possibly wondering why an entire army would arrive, dressed like they're about to hike the Alps. You trudge toward the outskirts of the city. Your armor is already heating up to the temperature of a small forge. A nearby knight has begun audibly bargaining with his own greaves. "Please don't boil my knees today." You silently promise your own boots a biscuit if they hold together. Louis orders the army to set camp just outside the city. Tents sprout like strange canvas mushrooms. You're assigned to a cluster near the clergy and the water carts, which seems ideal until you realize the clergy chant at sunrise, loudly, in Latin, off-key. Still, there's order in the chaos. Louis insists on discipline. No looting, no shouting, no unnecessary sword-waving. The latter rule is broken 3 times before sunset. One man loses his belt mid-swing and nearly rebrands himself as a belly dancer. Dinner is a mystery. Technically food. The stew tastes faintly of barley, goat, and remorse. You eat it anyway. Too tired to care. Louis sits nearby, surrounded by advisors and a circle of prayer-humming monks. He eats the same stew, possibly more slowly. out of reverence. Possibly because his spoon is stuck. Night falls over the delta like a warm, buzzing curtain. Insects hover. The Nile laps at its banks, lazy and deep. From your cot, you can see the city gates flicker with torchlight. You think about the people inside. Are they afraid? Angry? Just annoyed to be part of someone else's holy ambition? Historians still argue whether Damietta was caught off guard or quietly prepared. Some chronicles suggest the Sultan underestimated the size of Louis's force. Others hint that internal politics in Cairo made quick defense unlikely. Either way, the city doesn't immediately respond, which is good, because you're not ready for anything beyond basic walking and sighing. The first skirmish comes 2 days later. It's brief, hot, and loud. Egyptian cavalry sweeps near the camp. Dust explodes. Arrows whistle. You crouch behind a barrel, thinking of your mother, and also the particularly crunchy lentil you bit into earlier. Knights rally. Trumpets blare. Louis is already on horseback, his cross banner raised, calling orders in a voice more composed than you'd expect from someone being pelted with projectiles. The enemy retreats. Casualties are light. Spirits lift. You shake sand out of your helmet and try not to think about how much of it might now be permanently residing in your ears. In the aftermath, the camp settles into a rhythm. Days are filled with patrols, fortification building, and increasingly desperate attempts to stay cool. Someone invents a water-splashing game that devolves into a full-scale, soaked tunic contest. Louis frowns at it. Then, when no one's looking, he very calmly pours a small cup of water on his own head. Nights are for prayers and planning. Louis holds strategy meetings in the command tent, where maps are rolled out and lit by lantern glow. You're occasionally invited, mostly to take notes, though once you're asked to stand very still and hold a compass because someone lost the table, the city remains quiet. Too quiet. A whisper goes around that Damietta is preparing to surrender. You're not convinced. There's a thickness in the air. Not just the heat. Something else. Tension. Stillness. The pause before a bowstring releases. And then, without warning, it happens. Damietta opens its gates. But not in battle. The garrison has fled. The city is empty. Or nearly so. You march through the gates with the others, cautious, suspicious. The air smells of incense and fear. Markets are abandoned, fruit still rotting on carts. A cat darts between your legs and vanishes into an alley. It feels like walking through a theater that just closed mid-performance. Louis enters last. He halts beneath the main archway, removes his helm, and crosses himself. "Thanks be to God," he says. And just like that, Damietta is French. For now. There's no looting. Louis forbids it, under pain of excommunication. Instead, soldiers post guards, priests bless doorways, and scribes begin the slow process of inventorying every pot, rug, and poultry pen left behind. You find a quiet rooftop that night, sit with your legs dangling over the edge, and watch torchlight move through the city like fireflies. It's beautiful. Also, a little unsettling. Historians still debate why the defenders fled. Some say they feared a siege too costly to endure. Others cite a lack of unified command. A few just blame the relentless heat. You, meanwhile, are just thankful there was no bloodshed. Yet, Louis turns Damietta into a temporary capital. He orders the rebuilding of a church, the repair of walls, and the distribution of food to any civilians who remained. It's generous, exhausting, and deeply in character. He still wears wool. Every single day. You consider staging an intervention, then remember he's technically God's anointed monarch and probably immune to fashion advice. Instead, You settle into the city's rhythm half-occupied, fully peculiar, and wait. Because you know, this quiet won't last. The real march the one into Egypt's heart is still ahead, and your boots, loyal but distressed, are already beginning to whimper. You wake up to the sound of a goat chewing on your tent rope. Again. It's been 3 weeks since the dramatic, mostly peaceful takeover of Damietta, and while you're no closer to glory, you have developed a complex relationship with the local livestock. This one, who has been nicknamed Sir Choose-a-Lotus, particularly fond of biting through anything tied in a knot. Outside, the city hums with controlled chaos. Louis has turned Damietta into a crucible of crusader routine. Every day begins with prayer, continues with planning, and ends in the kind of tired silence that only comes after hours of building earthworks and pretending you know how siege engines work. The air is thick, not just with heat, but with waiting. Dust clings to your robes, your eyebrows, even your lunch. You've stopped complaining about the wool because, honestly, the chafing is now just a dull background hymn, like the bells that ring from the converted mosque that now serves as a cathedral. It's just part of life. Louis has settled in surprisingly well. He moves through the city like a man on retreat rather than campaign, distributing orders one moment and alms the next. He visits hospitals. He prays with the men. He fasts with almost alarming frequency. The soldiers, meanwhile, are bored. Boredom on crusade is its own kind of torment. These are men who were promised glory, not inventory. You've spent the last 2 days helping catalog every spear shaft and wheel of cheese left in the city. There's a pile of ornate pillows somewhere that 3 nights have nearly come to blows over. One insists they're divinely embroidered. Another just wants something soft to sit on. You suggest maybe we all just take a nap. The suggestion is not well received. Still, the tension is growing. You feel it in your chest, in the way soldiers sharpen their swords too often, or in how Robert of Artois has started practicing cavalry charges through the city square, sending merchants scattering and upsetting no fewer than 5 poultry vendors. One evening, you overhear 2 knights arguing about the plan. We should march now, one says, while the Nile's low. We wait, says the other. The Sultan is regrouping. Better to dig in. They both look at you. You pretend to be very interested in a nearby lantern. Historians still argue whether Louis delayed too long in Damietta. The floodwaters of the Nile were rising, yes, but so was the risk of losing momentum. The longer the army lingered, the more supplies dwindled, and the more disease began to whisper its name around the camp. You spend your afternoons accompanying a Franciscan friar who insists on blessing every cistern and inspecting every well. He speaks to the water like it's a person. You quietly do the same, more of a pleading, really. Just stay clean. Just stay cold. Just don't smell like soup. Then there's the sermons. Louis has introduced a program of near-constant religious activity. Morning Mass. Midday Scripture. Evening reflection. Some men take comfort in this. Others nap through it. You try your best, but it's hard to concentrate when your ankles are swollen and the man next to you is snoring into a book of Psalms. Still, it's better than the drills. Oh, the drills. Marching practice under a sun that seems personally offended by your existence. You spend hours learning how to cross the delta in formation should the army advance inland. Theoretically. So far, all you've done is walk in circles around the same dried-up irrigation ditch while someone yells, "Stay in line!" and another person throws up from heatstroke. One knight collapses. Louis personally helps him to the medical tent. Another knight complains his visor has melted. You do not correct him. Then, at last, there's news. The Sultan has mobilized his forces. Word reaches the camp one stifling morning. A dusty scout rides in, too tired to dismount properly, and mumbles something about Mamluks, river crossings, and more men than expected. Suddenly, Everything sharpens. Louis calls a council. You listen at the edge of the tent while maps are unrolled, hands point, and voices rise. March now, or wait? Floods are coming. The Nile swells with each passing day. The land beyond Damietta will soon turn to marsh. If the army goes, it must go sooner. Not at all. Louis stands slowly, quiet until the room stills. We go, he says. You're both thrilled and horrified. Adventure. But also mud. So much mud. Preparations begin. Tents are packed. Horses are fed. Water barrels are filled. You polish Mildred, your sword, even though she has yet to see action. She gleams resentfully. You pack extra socks. The mood in the camp is electric. Finally, something to do. You hear laughter again. You hear people arguing about whether to wear their good surcoat or their marching surcoat. You even catch a priest humming. Louis leads a final mass in the courtyard of the cathedral, formerly a mosque. Hundreds gather. He prays for victory, for courage, for the souls of those who may fall. You feel the weight of his words settle into your bones. That night, you can't sleep. You lie under the stars. There are always stars here, and listen to the restless shuffle of men, the soft clang of armor, and the distant call of a heron somewhere on the Nile. The air is hot, sticky, and full of what's about to happen. In the morning, the army moves. It's slow going. Every wheel sinks an inch deeper into the soft ground. The baggage carts creak like elderly widows. You pass farmers staring at you from the fields, eyes narrowed, arms crossed. They don't speak. They don't wave. You want to wave. You don't. Louis rides at the front, cross standard held high. His robe is still wool. You've stopped caring. Honestly, at this point, if he marched into Cairo wearing a blanket made of thorns, you wouldn't blink. The Nile Delta unfolds ahead of you flat, wide, endless. The roads are uncertain. The air smells of wet earth and animal. You pass canals, ditches, the occasional abandoned hut, and then it hits you. This isn't going to be a quick campaign. This is going to be slow, and heavy, and hot, and possibly holy. You grip your reins, adjust your helmet, whisper to Mildred, and march. The siege begins with sermons. You expect drums, trumpets, a sudden crash of steel and sand. Instead, you get priests, dozens of them. Louis insists that every morning begins with prayer. Not just a muttered Ave Maria or a quick crossing of yourself, no full processions, sung litanies, incense wafting into the already choking air like a theological fog machine. You line up with your fellow soldiers, sweat beading on your neck, and listen as monks chant in Latin while flies perform aerial acrobatics around your ears. It's not exactly what you pictured when you imagined a siege. But then again, this isn't your average siege. You've arrived at the outskirts of Mansoura, a fortified town nestled behind river branches and reed-choked ditches. It's where the Egyptian army waits. The real Egyptian army, not just city guards or startled locals, actual professional fighters. Mamluks, men trained from childhood to fight, ride, and very efficiently ruin the hopes of foreign invaders. You try not to think about that part too hard. The camp goes up quickly. Tents flap, supply lines stretch. You help unload crates marked with Latin symbols that may or may not say, "Do not drop." Inside, there are everything from crossbow strings to communion wine. The latter gets locked away quickly. No accidents this time. Louis stations himself near the center of the camp, beneath a large white banner stitched with a gold cross. His tent is simple, but you can tell where he is by the constant stream of advisors and barefoot friars pacing in and out like anxious bees around a particularly pious hive. You're assigned trench duty. It's exactly what it sounds like. digging, in mud. While people occasionally shoot things at you, you and three others take turns with the spade, each of you trying not to look too closely at the bones unearthed with every few shovelfuls. Ancient, maybe. Maybe not. Someone whispers that this very field has seen other invasions. You glance at the sky, silently asking it to schedule yours for a different day. Meanwhile, Louis visits the men. He walks the lines without guards, without fanfare, nodding solemnly, speaking gently. He blesses a wounded archer, shares his bread with a barefoot squire. You're beginning to think the man is constitutionally incapable of behaving like a normal king. He's also still wearing the wool robe. Historians still debate whether this was an act of personal penance, symbolic humility, or just very aggressive branding. Either way, it's starting to smell faintly of myrrh and mold. As the days wear on, the siege takes on a rhythm. Mornings begin with mass. Midday brings catapult practice. Evenings are for treating wounds and repairing gear. The French try to find their footing in a place that squelches under every step. The soil here is soft and deceptive. Your boots sink into it like pudding. Horses panic. Wagons tilt. A group of knights spends 2 full hours trying to rescue a cart that sank into what looked like firm ground, but turned out to be a disguised swamp. The locals, meanwhile, don't sit idle. The Egyptian defenders are clever. They send boats down the river to harass your supply lines. They light fires on the horizon at night, spooking the horses. They shoot arrows dipped in tar, making every patrol feel like walking through a fireworks test zone. One morning, you wake to the sound of singing. But it's not coming from the French side. The Mamluks have begun their own chants. Deep, rhythmic, and eerily melodic, it echoes across the water, a reminder that you're not just battling terrain and disease, you're battling an enemy who knows this land far better than you do. Still, Louis remains calm. He calls councils every night. Plans are drawn. Positions shifted. You're told the goal is to lure the Egyptian forces out of Mansoura. Force them into open battle. You nod, pretending to understand military strategy, while mainly focusing on not dropping your soup. That soup, by the way, has become your emotional support. It's thin, peppery, and full of unidentifiable floating things, but it's hot. And it doesn't smell like feet. You've begun referring to it as Saint Broth. One evening, while ladling out Saint Broth, you hear a commotion. Louis has received word. Reinforcements from Cairo are en route. Thousands. Possibly more. Panic begins to nibble at the edges of camp morale. Some men suggest retreating. Others argue for a night assault. Robert of Artois, Louis's hot-headed brother, demands immediate action. Strike. Now. Or lose the chance, he growls, slamming his goblet on the table. Louis raises a hand. We wait. Until we are shown the right hour. You, personally, were hoping the right hour would include less mud. The next day, the sky opens. Rain. Not a soft drizzle. Not a polite mista downpour. You become part of the landscape, indistinguishable from the muck around you. Your tent leaks. Your boots squelch ominously. One soldier accidentally leaves his sword in the mud and retrieves only the hilt. Yet the siege continues. Louis orders new trenches dug. You question whether he knows what trenches look like in this kind of weather. Spoiler. They look like small lakes. Mosquitoes rejoice. You spend a few hours trying to dry your socks by the campfire. A knight from Provence offers you a tip stuff your shoes with garlic and rosemary. You try it. You regret it immediately. Now your feet are hot and herby. The Egyptians grow bolder. Scouting parties vanish. A supply barge is ambushed and set ablaze. You watch as a plume of black smoke curls over the camp. It smells of oil and old hopes. At night, Louis walks the perimeter, sometimes alone, sometimes with a priest. You catch glimpses of his profile in the torch light, calm, thoughtful, tired, and still in wool. You're beginning to believe he likes it. Historians still argue whether Louis was a skilled military strategist or just very good at appearing unbothered by disasters. His biographers insist he stayed composed even in the worst moments. His critics note that many of those moments were arguably his fault. You're just trying to keep your toes dry. Then, one morning, a change. A single Mamluk scout is captured near the edge of camp. He carries a message, a taunt, really inviting the French to try crossing the river if they dare. Robert of Artois dares. But not yet. Not tonight. For now, Louis closes the day with prayer. He asks for wisdom, for patience, for strength. You ask for dry socks and fewer trench-digging assignments. The siege goes on. So does the waiting. And somewhere in the distance, Mansoura waits, too quiet, watchful, and ready. You wake to the sound of clanging, not sword shelmets. Specifically, a knight trying to dislodge his helm from a tent pole with all the grace of a drunk goat. You roll over on your cot, your back sore from sleeping on uneven ground, your dreams interrupted by someone loudly debating whether carrying 3 rosaries increases divine favor or just adds to the neck pain. It's another day on the Nile front. Camp life has settled into a kind of deranged routine. Every morning you rise, shake the bugs out of your tunic, sip something that may have once been wine but now just tastes like regret, and report for your daily dose of trench rot, tactical confusion, and spiritual reflection. Today, though, something's different. The sun is unusually intense, beating down with the aggressive enthusiasm of a blacksmith late on rent. The air smells like iron, baked onions, and ambition. Everyone's armor has taken on a sheen of sweat and dust that makes the whole army look like it's been sprinkled with expired glitter. You get your orders patrol near the southern perimeter, with 2 knights, a very nervous squire named Etienne, and a mule that keeps giving you judgmental looks. The trail winds past makeshift palisades and piles of unassembled siege equipment. You squint across the river, where the city of Mansoura squats behind its walls like a cat, daring someone to poke it. The Mamluks are quiet today. Too quiet. Historians still argue whether this was calculated restraint or the side effect of Egyptian reinforcements still positioning themselves. But it gives the camp a kind of tense silence, the same kind you feel in your gut when someone says, "Don't worry, I've got a plan," and then pulls out a chicken and a map. Louis continues his ritualistic steadiness. You see him in the distance, walking among the soldiers with a priest, murmuring blessings, touching the wounded with 2 fingers and a soft prayer. He even shares his personal physician with a knight who's been hallucinating about bread that talks. You're told the bread was quite encouraging. He still wears the robe. It's no longer clean, but he insists on washing it himself, in a basin near his tent. You once watched him scrubbing the hem like a washerwoman possessed, whispering scripture all the while. You've stopped questioning it. You've also stopped volunteering to carry his laundry. As noon approaches, you're called to help with banners. Specifically, realigning the cross standards that mark the formation center. It's ceremonial, mostly unless someone's trying to aim an arrow at something important. One of the knights argues that the banner looks better 2 feet to the left. Another insists it must align with the position of the sun at the last Easter Mass. You suggest flipping a coin. They don't laugh. As you hammer the pole into the earth, a distant horn blows. Not yours. From across the river, the camp tenses. Louis emerges from his tent, eyes narrowed, lips moving in prayer. The horn sounds again, this time joined by the rhythmic beat of war drums. Mamluks, preparing something. You scramble back to your position. Etienne drops his helmet and nearly impales himself trying to pick it up. The mule flees. You consider following, but nothing comes. Just the noise, the music, the reminder. They're watching and waiting. That evening, the heat refuses to lift. You sit near the cook fires, sipping what may or may not be broth. Someone has added garlic to it, possibly by mistake, possibly out of spite. You don't care. You're too tired to taste. Across the camp, a group of soldiers are arguing over heraldry again. One claims his family crest is a bear. Another says it's a hedgehog. You suggest perhaps it's a hedgehog wearing a bear costume. They consider this. They stop fighting. It's progress. Sudden a noise. A shout. A clamor. You leap up. A scout has returned, panting, pointing back toward the riverbanks. They're building rafts, he says. On the far side. Looks like they're preparing to cross. You look at the water. It glistens under the moon like a silvered mirror, hiding something beneath it. The Nile here splits into channels, some deep, some deceptively shallow. No one knows all the paths. Not even the locals. Louis gathers his council. You stand outside, trying to listen. Robert of Artois is demanding action again. Strike first, he says. Drive them back before they cross. A bishop disagrees. Let them cross. We'll trap them between the banks. Louis says nothing. He looks at the map, at the river, then down at his hands. He leaves the tent without a word, walks to the edge of the camp, kneels, and prays. For a very long time, you sit beside him, quietly. Say nothing. The stars overhead blink slowly, watching your army of hopeful souls in their dusty boots and righteous confusion. It's nearly dawn when Louis stands, dusts off his knees, and says simply, "Tomorrow, we prepare." No speech, no drama, just that, and it's enough. The next morning, you're part of the work crew fortifying the southern defenses. You drive stakes into the soft earth, reinforcing trenches, adjusting firing angles for the crossbow teams. The sun rises, the Nile glimmers, and still no assault. But now everyone's bracing for it, even the mule. Camp life that day is half routine, half performance. You sharpen your sword next to a monk writing a poem. You overhear a knight trying to name his future children after saints, but only ones with cool-sounding titles. What about Saint Maximus the Iron-Browed? You polish your armor, you oil your boots, you resalt your socks. Louis visits each unit. He says little, but his presence calms the anxious and stiffens the lazy. There's something in his silence. Something in the way he holds his ridiculous, glorious wool robe like it's a flag no storm could bend. That night, it finally happens. The first volleys come from the far banqueroes, stones, a few flaming projectiles that land harmlessly in the mud. You hold your breath. The Mamluks are probing, testing. It's not a battle yet, but it's close. You lie down that night under a sky lit faintly by distant torches and the occasional flicker of firelight from the enemy side. And you think, it won't be long now. The siege is no longer just a test of might. It's a battle of patience. And as your eyes close, your last thought is, I hope patience comes with a nap. You awaken before dawn to the sound of shouting, not the panicked kind, but the coordinated kind, the kind that usually precedes something very bad or very strategic. You roll off your cot, still tangled in your blanket, and immediately stub your toe on a crate labeled, Blessed Oil Dough, not Kick. Too late. Outside, camp is buzzing. Knights are adjusting gear. Pages are scrambling. Etienne, your assigned squire/walking apology, is trying to brush mud off your tunic using a palm frond and optimism. Word spreads fast. A plan is in motion. Louis' commanders have located a possible crossing point up Rivera shallow channel, where the French might outflank the Egyptian army by crossing at night, hitting them from behind, and breaking the siege from within. You take one look at the shallow channel and have some doubts. It looks more like a half-drowned ditch, teeming with reeds, mosquitoes, and amphibians of questionable temperament. But Robert of Artois is already preparing to lead the charge, and Louis has sanctioned the maneuver. You are, unfortunately, assigned to it. Crossing a river in armor is like trying to wrestle a wet bookshelf while wearing a suit of saucepans. You trudge into the water chest deep, boots squelching, sword above your head like it's a relic from a slightly less damp religion. Etienne follows behind you, praying aloud, which is sweet, but the river seems unimpressed. By the time you emerge on the far bank, you are soaked, cold, and extremely aware that your underclothes were never meant for aquatic excursions. Still, the mission proceeds. You hunker down in the reeds. You and 50 other snights, footmen, a few crossbowmen, who keep arguing over whether it's blessed string or just regular string, but prayed over. All wait, in tense silence. The plan. Robert and a small detachment launch a surprise assault on the enemy camp near Mansoura's gates, while Louis and the rest of the army press forward from the opposite bank. Simple, brilliant, potentially fatal. Historians still argue whether the strategy was genuinely clever or just a spectacular misreading of Mamluk defensive positions. Some suggest Robert improvised. Others insist he just didn't listen. You've met Robert. You lean toward the latter, because what happens next is chaos. Robert launches the assault too early, far too early. Instead of waiting for coordinated support, he charges straight into a trap. The gates of Mansoura, thought to be poorly guarded, swing open like the jaws of some ancient god. And out pour the Mamluks disciplined, mounted, fast. You're still wiping riverweed from your ears when the shouting begins. Robert's detachment is swallowed. There's no time to think. Arrows whistle past your head. Someone screams. Etienne drops his spear and starts reciting the wrong psalm entirely. You duck behind a boulder, clutching Mildred, your untested sword, and say the most practical prayer you've ever uttered. Please, not the face. The battle isn't even a proper one. It's a collapse. Mamluks surround Robert's forces. You catch glimpses of horses, scimitars, and banners snapping like thunderclaps. You manage to strike one enemy soldier across the arm. It's messy, chaotic, full of mud and regret. He shouts. You shout louder. Neither of you lands another blow before he's pulled back into the mass by another warrior who clearly has somewhere else to be. You and the surviving few pull back toward the river, scrambling, bleeding, trying not to panic. Louis, upon hearing of Robert's premature attack, responds with characteristic calm. We hold our ground, he says, then orders his men to advance carefully. You admire his composure. You also wish he'd sent snacks. Eventually, the French forces push forward enough to recover part of the flank, but Robert of Artois is lost. Some say he died in battle. Others say he was dragged into the city, his fate unclear. Etienne, in tears, mutters, he was very loud, but also very brave. You nod, wiping mud from your eyes, mostly loud. That night, the camp feels different. The mood has shifted. There's no singing, no debating saints. Just the quiet clatter of armor being repaired and the low murmur of priests tending the wounded. Louis walks among the men again. He kneels beside a soldier missing 3 fingers. He blesses a body wrapped in linen. He speaks with a young knight who has lost his horse and his will to fight. You are not here to be invincible, Louis tells him. You are here to be faithful. You try not to cry. You mostly succeed. But it's hard not to feel that some part of the Crusade's innocence or glory or idealism died with Robert. The next few days are recovery and recalibration. The enemy doesn't press the advantage. Perhaps they're regrouping. Perhaps they're waiting for the Nile's next surge. Either way, the French dig in. You help rebuild a defensive wall using sandbags and wood from a broken supply cart. Etienne insists on carving a small cross into each sandbag. You suggest maybe just one big one would suffice. He ignores you. Louis holds a council. It's tense. His generals argue over next steps. Advance? Retreat? Wait for reinforcements? A priest suggests fasting again. He is ignored. Louis finally speaks. We came to serve Christ. We will not retreat in fear, but we will not rush headlong into folly. That's his way of saying, we wait. Again, you return to camp life, such as it is. You write a letter home that will probably never arrive. You practice sword drills half-heartedly. You eat hard bread and pray it wasn't the same loaf used during target practice. You hear rumors that the Sultan himself is arriving, that Egyptian forces are gathering near the southern canal, that a spy was caught in the camp posing as a wine merchant. Honestly, that last one might have just been a real wine merchant with poor timing. Still, the camp holds. Louis keeps order. He leads morning prayers. He fasts 3 days a week. He now sleeps on the ground beside his tent, insisting the King of France deserves no more comfort than the lowest foot soldier. You try it once. It's awful. You go back to your cot. But still, you admire him. Even in defeat, even in loss, Louis does not waver. His robe is patched. His beard is longer. His hands are calloused. But his eyes remain steady. And so you keep marching. Not through fields or cities now, but through doubt. And through that too, you follow your king. You wake to the sound of frogs, hundreds of them, singing in the canals, chirping from the reeds, and, in one case, sitting smugly in your water bowl like it's booked a spa treatment. You stare at it. It blinks slowly. You leave it there. The Nile has begun to rise. The land around you is no longer dry and cracked but slick and spongy, like someone's forgotten pudding. The roadsif. You can even call them roads are now shallow, silty rivers. The once solid fields around Mansoura have turned into a kind of natural moat. Boots squelch, wagons tip, horses panic at the sight of their own reflections. And yet, Louis marches, not recklessly, not with flair, steadily, with the unshakable resolve of someone who has decided that walking into a swamp in wool is just another minor trial on the way to sainthood. You, meanwhile, are developing trench foot. The decision is made. Move the army south along the Nile, tighten the noose around Mansoura, and if the waters don't drown, you first force the Mamluks into a corner. At least, that's the idea. Historians still debate whether this was bold strategy or wishful thinking. The land is changing daily, sometimes hourly. A passable causeway at dawn might be a lagoon by lunch. Maps blur. Plans shift. Everything you do has to be adjusted for the fact that Egypt is, in fact, made entirely of mud. You are assigned to a scouting party. It sounds heroic until you realize your job is mostly walking ahead of the baggage train and poking the ground with a stick to see if it swallows you. On the third day of marching, Etienne, your eternal companion in poor judgment, loses a sandal in a bog and nearly sinks trying to retrieve it. It was my favorite one, he whimpers. Ankle. Deep in despair. You leave it behind with full military honors. Meanwhile, tensions in the camp are rising like the river. Food is running low. Salted meat is running out. Someone tried to bake flatbread using flour and river water. The results caused a minor theological debate over whether bread could be cursed. Louis, of course, still fasts regularly. He eats little, prays much, and continues to wear the same wool robe that now smells like penance and pond. He never complains. He never retreats. One afternoon, while your unit is rerouting a supply wagon around what used to be a village path and is now a very lively frog habitat, you hear a horn blast. Not yours. The enemy's ounds. You drop the sack you're carrying and look up to see movement across the waterlogged field. Riders. Dozens. Fast and bright, kicking up arcs of spray as they maneuver around your left flank. Mamluks. They're not attacking. Not yet. Just circling, watching, reminding you. They are not trapped. You are. You rush back to the main line, heart pounding. The alarm spreads through the ranks. By the time you reach the forward command post, Louis is already there, calm as ever, issuing orders. He tells the men to hold formation. He tells the priests to lead prayer. He tells Etienne to bring him a map that has not been used as a drying cloth. You don't know whether to be inspired or worried. Probably both. The Mamluks vanish as quickly as they came. Scouting, maybe. Testing defenses. Or maybe just toying with you. Either way, the message is clear. They know the terrain. They own the rivers. You're just visiting. That night, morale sinks like your boots in the canal. Injuries mount not from battle, but from slips, falls, infections. A soldier falls into a ditch and comes up covered in something that may once have been a cow and is now an ecological mystery. He is sent to the medics. They wash him. Twice. He still smells like theology gone wrong. Supplies dwindle. Water must be boiled. Bread is half ash. You try chewing a date and find it full of grit. You chew anyway. Still, Louis presses on. He tells his men, "We do not win by speed. We win by faith." It's a nice sentiment, but you'd prefer dry socks and a better bridge. Speaking of bridges, someone suggests building one across a marshy canal to bypass a flooded stretch of path. Louis approves it. You are conscripted to help. For 3 straight days, you ferry wood, rope, and curses back and forth, while Etienne tries to befriend a stork that will not stop following your group. He names it Blessed Bertrand. You suspect it is mocking you. The bridge is built. It immediately collapses. Everyone nods solemnly and starts again. Still, the army advances inch by inch through mire and murk, holding to a thread of purpose that only seems visible to Louis. His faith is unshakable, his resolve maddening. You pass villages abandoned, fields flooded, mosques silent. And through it all, he walks, wool clinging to him like divine obligation. At one point, you find him kneeling by a dying soldier. No fanfare, no audience. Just Louis, and a hand on the man's forehead, whispering something that sounds like peace. You keep walking. The heat returns. Not just warm blistering. The mud dries just enough to crack underfoot. Dust replaces puddles. The Nile retreats slightly, leaving behind crusty plains of salt and bitterness. And that's when the smell begins. Rotting food. Unwashed tunics. The faint but unmistakable tang of desperation. Even the priests begin skipping psalms in favor of quick invocations. You catch one monk muttering, "Lord, if it please you, make the frogs stop." They do not stop. They multiply. But then, one evening after days of grime, heat, and stork-related indignity, you crest a low ridge and see it. The canal. The path to Mansoura's gate. It's narrow, winding, flanked by high reeds and treacherous footing, but it's there. A way forward. Louis gathers his commanders. A plan forms. They will cross. Soon. You exhale. The battle is coming. But for the first time in days, you can see the road. Even if it's muddy, even if it's dangerous. It leads forward, and so will you. You're up before the sun again, but this time there's a crackle in the air. Not just the usual snapping of damp canvas or the eternal symphony of frogs, but something sharper, more electric, a kind of charged silence that prickles your skin and makes Etienne drop his bread mid-bite. Today's the day. The day Louis orders the army to cross the canal and face Mansoura head-on. You pull on your armor with shaking hands. It's not fear, okay? It's partly fear, but it's also the sheer physical demand of fastening damp leather and buckling plates that haven't been properly dried in a week. Your greaves smell like regret. Your gloves are crunchy. Your heart is doing some kind of irregular gallop in your chest. The men assemble along the canal's edge in near silence. You watch as Louis kneels, places his palm in the mud, and prays. His lips barely move, but the moment stills around him like the hush before a bell tolls. Then, the order. You wade in. Crossing the canal is both worse and better than you imagined. The water is waist-deep in places, deceptively shallow in others. The mud is like quicksand, grabbing at your boots with greedy fingers. You and the other foot soldiers form a tight line, shoulder to shoulder, swords raised like uncertain antennas, waiting to see if the heavens are tuned to your channel. The cavalry follows. Knights nudge reluctant horses into the shallows. One rears and throws its rider. Etienne tries to help, and ends up flat on his back, face first in the Nile. You pull him up. He's laughing and crying at the same time. You suspect you are too, and then shouts, "Not yours," from the opposite bank. They've seen you. The Mamluks. They appear suddenly from the reed salant, fast, terrifying. Their armor glints, their banners flutter, their horses seem to hover above the water. You freeze. Everyone freezes. And then the world erupts. Arrows arc through the air, slicing down like rain with an attitude. The first rank falters, the second pushes forward. You lift your shield, feel the thunk of impact, and lurch as the man beside you crumples. Your training kicks in, or maybe it's survival instinct, or just blind stubbornness. But you move, step by step, across the canal. The French army surges, scrambling for footing on the far bank. It's no longer a crossing, it's a push. Louis is somewhere behind, but you hear his voice through the din, calm and commanding. Hold the line. Advance. You do. You charge. And then somehow you're on the bank, in the thick of it. The Battle of El Mansoura has begun. What follows is hours of sweat, blood, and confusion. Not glorious. Not clean. A swirling tangle of screams, clashing steel, and clouds of dust that choke every breath. The Mamluks fight with precision, every move practiced, every charge disciplined. You, on the other hand, feel like you're just trying not to die in a really embarrassing way. You slash with Mildred your sword and catch someone's shield. It shatters. They stumble. You move on. A knight behind you yells something about flanking. You think about asking which way, then just keep swinging. Then a horn sounds yours. Finally, Louis's main force is across. The push becomes a wave. The French advance into the outskirts of Mansoura's defenses. You see a banner fall. You see it rise again. You lose sight of Etienne. Then you see him reappear, holding a mace that is definitely too big for him. "Found it," he yells. Think it used to be someone's. You don't ask. You fight. At some point, you end up behind a burned-out house. You crouch there, panting, while someone tries to staunch a leg wound with part of a banner. You lock eyes with a Mamluk soldier also hiding, both of you too tired to raise a weapon. He gives you a shrug. You shrug back, then he vanishes into the smoke. The battle goes on for what feels like days but is really just hours. When it ends abruptly. A horn. A retreat. You don't know whose. The Mamluks pull back, but not far. Just into the city. It's not a victory. It's a pause. You sit down in the mud and feel the weight of everything. The armor, the silence, the understanding that this was only round one. Historians still argue who technically won at Al-Mansura. Some say the French breached the defenses and pushed back the enemy. Others point out that the Mamluks lured the Crusaders into narrow streets and inflicted massive casualties. You don't care about who historians think won. You only care that you're still breathing. Louis calls a meeting that night in a makeshift command tent. He's exhausted. His robe is torn, his face streaked with mud, his voice hoarse, but he speaks clearly. We hold our ground. We will not retreat. Not now. Not ever. You don't cheer. No one does. Not because they don't believe him, but because they're too tired to move. Back in your tent, you find Etienne already asleep, snoring like a happy goat. You sit on your cot, unwrap your foot, and discover a blister that could qualify for its own coat of arms. You eat a crust of bread, drink half a cup of wine, and stare at the stars overhead, peeking through a tear in the canvas. Mansoura is still there, still holding, but so are you. Somehow, morning brings no rest. The sun rises slow and red over the Nile, casting long streaks of light across the churned-up battlefield. You wake with dust in your mouth, soreness in your ribs, and a mild sense that perhaps someone ran over you in the night with a wagon. Etienne is already up, trying to cook something that might once have been oats and now resembles warm sadness. You eat it anyway. Outside, the camp feels muted, not defeated, not broken, just sore. Every man is walking like he slept in a barrel. Bandages are wrapped over armor. Shields hang from makeshift poles like limp sails. But there's still motion. Still orders being barked, tents being resecured, arrows being counted and recounted. Louis emerges just after sunrise. He's pale, but upright. His wool robe-torn, stained, phryngis, still very much on. You have now accepted that nothing short of divine intervention or a very determined tailor will separate him from that garment. He walks slowly through the camp, pausing at each cluster of wounded. A few reach for his hand. Some just nod. One young man, his face bandaged, one eye swollen shut, murmurs something that sounds like, "Thank you for staying." Because Louis has stayed. He didn't flee after the ambush at Al-Mansura. He didn't retreat into the safety of Damietta. He didn't vanish into prayer while everyone else bled. He's here, boots muddy, robe ruined, leading from the heart of the mire. Today is about regrouping. The battlefield is too uncertain to press further into Mansura. Too dangerous. Too costly. So instead, you spend the day reinforcing the camp, patching the wounded, and trying to convince your limbs that they're not falling off. You're placed on water duty, transporting filled barrels from the canal back to camp. Simple, exhausting, and wet. Etienne accompanies you, though he mostly talks to a small turtle he's decided is a sign from God. You name it, Sir Slipshell, and let the boy have his moment. At midday, a Mamluk messenger approaches under flag of truce. Tense silence ripples through the ranks. You watch as the man, proud and stone-faced, speaks to Louis directly. The message is clear. Surrender or die in the swamp. Louis responds calmly, as if discussing market prices. Tell your master we fear no swamp, and less his threats. The messenger nods once and rides off. You swear you hear one of the cooks say, "Well, that's not going to help our case." That evening, Louis gathers his knights. You sneak into the back, pretending to adjust a barrel. His voice is steady, but softer than usual. We are not beaten, he says. We are tested, and we endure. He speaks of Jerusalem, of faith, of sacrifice, but also curiously of patience. It is not only the blade that wins battles, he says, but the heart that does not bend. You don't understand all of it, but it helps. Later, you clean your sword Mildred is nicked, but functional, and polish your helmet with what remains of a linen tunic you've been using as a hand towel. Etienne falls asleep sitting upright, still clutching Sir Slipshell. You leave him be. That night, the frogs sing again, and you wonder how long this siege will last. Days pass. Mansoura does not fall. You continue patrols, watching for signs of weakness in the city's defenses. There are none. The Mamluks are organized, intelligent, relentless. They control the waterways. They know the terrain. They strike without warning, fast and deadly, then vanish. Your supply lines begin to strain. Food grows scarce. Water is harder to purify. You begin trading spoonfuls of dried fruit for clean socks. One man offers his dagger in exchange for a heel of bread. Another trades a song for soap. You wonder how long before someone starts bartering for dreams. Disease creeps in. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just slow, persistent misery. Dysentery. You hear the word whispered like a curse. Men grow pale, weak, listless. The medical tents swell with bodies, and not all of them rise again. Louis does not hide from this. He visits the sick daily. He brings broth. He prays over them. He even washes the feet of a soldier too far gone to recognize him. One priest says it reminds him of Christ. You think it reminds you of exhaustion. One evening, you stumble upon Louis outside the camp perimeter. He's sitting by the Nile, watching the water drift past with the expression of someone trying to listen to something far away. You approach quietly. He doesn't turn but says, "They are strong." You nod. They know the land. They fight with the memory of ancestors. He sighs. But we have hope. And hope, unlike flesh, does not rot. You sit beside him, quietly. The river murmurs. Frogs sing. Somewhere in the distance, someone curses at a camel. It's almost peaceful, until word comes. The Sultan has died, or so say the latest rumors. It spreads like fire through the camp, whispers that the Mamluk command structure is crumbling, that now is the time to strike. Louis listens, watches, weighs. Historians still argue what he truly believed at that moment, whether he thought he could win, or simply couldn't imagine turning back. But he gives the order, prepare to march. The next assault is coming. The canal awaits, the mud waits. And you? You go to sleep with your sword nearby, your boots half cleaned, and Sir Slipshell nestled in Etienne's cloak like a holy relic. You are tired, but you are still here. You wake in the dark, not the comfortable blanket-heavy dark of your bed back home. Number. This is the damp, breathing dark of an army camp, poised on the edge of a mistake. The canal glistens under the moonlight like a coiled serpent, quiet but aware. The men around you shift in their sleep, some murmuring, some silent. Even the frogs seem unsure whether to sing or hold their breath. Because this morning, you march again. You pack your gear without a word. Etienne fumbles with his helmet, nearly puts it on backwards, and mutters a quiet prayer that might be directed at St. George or Sir Slipshell. Hard to say. You offer him a biscuit. He cries a little. You both eat anyway. Louis is already mounted when you arrive at the rally point. He's dressed in full armor now, though of course the wool robe is still there, visible beneath the chainmail like a stubborn banner of conviction. He greets the men with a nod. God is with us, he says. And then you move. The march south along the Nile is slow, heavy, and grim. The land is against you. The sun presses down with the full weight of its opinion. The path narrows, then floods, then turns to mud that smells suspiciously of something recently dead. Still, you move. The plan is bold. Outmaneuver the city entirely. Circle around. Cut off the Mamluks from their supply lines and force a surrender. It makes sense in theory. But in Egypt, the land makes its own decisions. Within hours, the army slows to a crawl. Carts sink. Horses stumble. A knight from Toulouse loses his entire boot in a swamp and insists on being carried. You do not volunteer. Soon after, you begin to hear it. The coughing. It starts small, a soldier here, a cook there. But it spreads quickly, like smoke through linen. Within days, nearly a third of the camp is sick. And not just the ordinary battlefield sniffles. No, this is the fever that dries the mouth, steals strength from the knees, and leaves even the strongest man looking like parchment left in the rain. Louis is one of them. You're there when he collapses. It's during a midday rest stop. He dismounts, walks 3 steps, and crumples like a saint who forgot to eat breakfast. The men rush forward. Priests panic. Etienne drops Sir Slipshell. You push through the crowd just in time to see the king's face ashen, eyes sunken, lips whispering something you can't quite hear. They carry him to a shaded tent, and for 3 days, you wait. Historians still argue what nearly killed Louis dysentery. Typhoid. Heat stroke. All 3? Possibly divine testing? No one agrees. But he survives. Barely. When he emerges, he's thinner, his voice is weaker. But his will? Unbroken. He asks for a mass. He insists on hearing confessions from his commanders. He even tries to walk through the sick tents again, though this time, 2 monks shadow him like concerned parents hovering behind a toddler on stilts. And then comes the worst news. Supplies are gone. Not running low, gone. The Mamluks, clever devils, have severed the French lines. No food is getting through. No reinforcements, no letters, no help. And the river? Now rising again. There's talk of retreat. Not from Louis, of course, but from others. You overhear whispers in the ranks. Back to Damietta. We can't hold. We'll all drown before we starve. Robert is dead. The army is dying. The city still holds. And so, finally, inevitably, the order is given. Retreat. It isn't shouted. It's whispered. Like a prayer. Or a shameful secret. You pack what you can carry mostly, dried meat and bitter memories, and prepare to march back north, the same way you came. Only now with fewer boots, fewer friends, and less hope. The withdrawal is slow, painful, and choked in silence. No one talks, no one sings. The only sound is the slosh of boots in mud and the occasional thud of a man dropping from exhaustion. And then, the trap closes. You don't see the Mamluks until it's far too late. They attack at dawn fast, ruthless, brilliant. They strike from the flanks, then vanish into the reeds, then strike again. You fight, but poorly. The French are in retreat, stretched thin, disorganized. You remember dropping your shield, grabbing Etienne's arm, dragging him behind a toppled cart. You remember praying, not in Latin, not in verse, just, please, please, please. Louis is captured, the King of France, taken by enemy soldiers while trying to defend his rear guard. You don't see it happen. You hear about it from a limping knight with blood on his cheek and vomit on his boots. They have him, he says. But he smiled when they did. The camp collapses into chaos. You hide for hours, pinned in a copse of papyrus, watching as the last shreds of the crusade disintegrate. And then nothing. Silence. When night falls, you emerge. The stars are soft. The Nile is still. And the crusade? Over. But Louis does not die. The Mamluks, impressed or perhaps baffled by his dignity, treat him well. They demand a ransom. He agrees, calmly, like they've asked him for a bit of spare coin, not the treasure of a kingdom. Back in the camp, the survivors what few remain gather in small clusters, trying to decide if they're blessed or cursed. You help organize the wounded. You find Etienne asleep under a broken shield, clutching Sir Slipshell. You smile, for the first time in days. And then you wait. Wait for word. Wait for the king. You wait an acre. You're not sure how you got there, exactly. The days after the collapse blur together: mud, fever, distant shouting. Then a ship, a cramped, creaking vessel filled with the wheezing remnants of what was once a crusading army and now feels more like the world's most stubborn convalescent choir. The crossing is rough. The sea heaves like it's personally offended by your choices. Etienne throws up 6 times. You throw up 4, which you count as a victory. But you arrive. Acre, the Crusader stronghold. A city caught somewhere between glory and exhaustion, with one foot in every century and one eye always watching the horizon. You set up outside the city walls in a makeshift camp reserved for people with more fleas than morale. The tents are ragged. The food is beige. But it's dry. No frogs. You're grateful. Louis arrives a few weeks later, released after the ransom is paid. 30,000 bezants and the surrender of Damietta, a high price for a king in a wool robe. But the Mamluks agree. Some say they admired him. Others say they were just eager to rid themselves of a man who could pray through dysentery and command respect from a muddy ditch. He steps ashore quietly, without ceremony. You're there to see it. He looks older, leaner. Something in his posture has changed, not broken, but weathered. Like an old cathedral beam. Still holding strong, but not without cracks. He walks through the camp like he never left. He speaks to the men. He orders clean water. He thanks the cooks, blesses the sick, and insists on sleeping in the smallest tent. Etienne asks him why. Louis smiles faintly. Because I do not deserve comfort until Jerusalem is free. The boy bows. You pull him aside and tell him he should really let go of that turtle. In Acre, life slows. There are no immediate campaigns. No grand attacks. Just days of waiting, planning, rebuilding. You watch Louis build not just new supply chains or shelters, but hospitals, proper ones. He redirects funds to care for the sick. He establishes systems for treating wounded soldiers regardless of rank. He even spends several nights tending to patients personally, holding their hands while they die. It's not the crusade anyone expected, but maybe it's the one they needed. Historians still argue about his time in Acre. Some say he wasted it, nursing an unwinnable obsession. Others say he laid the groundwork for something holier than conquest, dignity and defeat. You mostly notice that Louis no longer talks much about Jerusalem, not aloud, but he keeps a worn map tucked into the lining of his travel chest. You see him take it out sometimes, study it in the fading light. He touches it like it's a wound that never quite healed. One day, Etienne, with the enthusiasm only a teenage squire can muster, asks Louis what he plans to do next. The king pauses. Wait, he says. We wait, and we serve. It becomes the refrain of Acre. You spend your days hauling water, helping rebuild a church wall, and playing a dice game that may or may not have been invented by a particularly bored monk. Nights are softer now. The stars seem less distant. You even sleep through until morning. And yet, there's a pull, a weight, a sense that unfinished things still echo in the quiet. Louis never stops wearing the robe. You ask him once gently, carefully, why. He shrugs. Because I promised. You never learn to like the robe, but you understand it. You write a letter home. You tell them you're safe. You don't mention how many friends didn't make it back. You end it with, I followed a man to Egypt. I thought we were going to win. Instead, we learned how to endure. Louis stays in Acre for 4 more years. 4 years of tending to the sick, planning new crusades, and sending letters back to France where his mother Blanche of Castilla rules in his stead. And then she dies. It comes by messenger one gray morning. Louis doesn't cry. He simply says, it is time to return. And so, you pack again. Not in victory. Not in shame. But with the odd, quiet dignity of someone who walked through fire, mud, and moral uncertainty, and came out still believing in the worth of trying. The fleet prepares. Ships are loaded. You stand on the dock with Etienne, both of you older than you were, wearing the same worn tunics and carrying far fewer expectations. Louis boards last. He turns, blesses the city, and whispers something no one catches. You like to think it was a thank you, or maybe a promise to return. And then the sails rise, the ropes creak, and France calls him home. Calls you home. And you go. France looks smaller when you return. Not physically, of course. The mountains still rise like shrugged shoulders. The fields still roll like bedsheets freshly smoothed. But something about it all feels quieter, like the country has been holding its breath in your absence. You step off the ship, boots scraping the stone pier, and breathe in the thick, grassy air of home. Etienne nearly weeps when he spots a proper loaf of bread. You stop him from proposing to it. Louis disembarks behind you. His face is gaunt. His robe still wool, still stubbornly attached to his fromenau, seems more like a relic than clothing. Tattered at the hem, faded from sun and salt. It's been through Egypt, Acre, storms, siege, sickness. And yet, like its wearer, it has refused to fall apart. The king walks slowly through the port of Aigues-Mortes, nodding to those who gather. No parade, no trumpets, just silence, broken by the occasional murmur. The king has returned. You travel with the royal party to Paris. The roads are familiar, so is the rain. But your pace is slower. You no longer ride like you're chasing glory. You ride like you've seen what it costs. France has changed too. Queen Blanche is gone. Nobles jostle for influence. The treasury is thinner than the soup you survived on outside Mansoura. But still, the country functions. Crops grow. Bells ring. Children chase chickens with the same joyful chaos they always have. And Louis rules, but differently. He no longer issues commands like thunder from a pulpit. He speaks softly. He listens more. He sits with scribes late into the night, not just writing laws but studying them. He wants fairness, clarity, even kindness. Historians often say Louis returned a better king than the one who left. You agree. He expands the Parlement of Paris. He invites poor petitioners to speak directly to him once a week, hearing their complaints with the kind of patience you usually reserve for turtles and teenage squires. One of his first reforms is to regulate bread weights. Bread. The very thing Etienne cried over. You can't tell if that's hilarious or poetic. He builds hospitals, more of them. He donates land to beggars. He cracks down on corruption among his own officials. Once, he walks through a small village and notices a broken water wheel. 3 days later, royal workers arrive to fix it. People begin to murmur the word saint. Louis ignores it. But you can tell it bothers him. He didn't return to be canonized. He returned to serve. The years pass. You stay in his service, mostly because you still haven't figured out what else to do. Etienne grows taller. You grow older. Sir Slipshell finally retires to a pond near the Abbey of Saint Denis, where he lives a suspiciously long and comfortable life. And Louis? He prepares. Not for war, but for meaning. Every decision he makes seems tinged with the knowledge of what was lost in Egypt. He commissions chapels, not monuments. He funds scholars, not sculptors. He writes letters to the Mamluks, not threats, but quiet diplomacy. He begins to dream of one last journey, a return to North Africa. You don't believe it at first, but the signs are there. He speaks of Carthage, of conversion, not conquest, of planting a new seed where the old one died. You hear it in his sermons, see it in the way he stares too long at maps, and in 1270, he sails again. You do not go with him. Your legs aren't what they were. Your armor creaks when you look at it. Etienne no. A knight in his own right offers to go in your place. Louis lands in Tunis, but the heat is worse this time. The supply lines are weaker, and the plague is waiting. He dies there, beneath a modest canopy, surrounded by friars and sweat. He wears the robe to the end. They say his last words were, "Jerusalem." You sit alone beneath a pear tree outside Paris when the news arrives. You close your eyes, not in sorrow, but in understanding. He didn't die a conqueror. He died a servant, and he was never afraid of the mud. You think back to the beginning, the march, the robe, the prayers, the frogs, and despite everything, you smile, because you followed a man to Egypt in wool robes under a brutal sun, and somewhere along the way, you learned what it meant to lead, not with power, but with purpose, not with force, but with faith. And now, you let it all go. The heat, the hunger, the rhythm of boots in the mud, the shouts and sermons and distant, flickering torchlight. It fades. Softly, the Nile quiets behind your thoughts, its current slowing, its waters calming. The sand settles. The stars above Egypt blink slower now, like eyes finally closing. And the robathy, rough wool robe worn through a crusade and back again gently folds itself into memory. You feel your breath deepen. The sounds of battle, of command, of prayer they hush, until all that's left is a breeze slipping through the canvas of an old tent, fluttering gently, whispering stories to the dark. Your muscles soften, your shoulders drop. You picture Luinat as a king, but as a man kneeling by a soldier, washing dirt from a wound with his own hands, not seeking a crown of gold, but something quieter, lighter, and you realize that's all you need tonight. Not conquest, not victory, just the quiet strength of someone who tried. So breathe now. In, slow and steady. Out, even slower. The journey is over. The story rests. And so do you. Sleep well, traveler of time. Tomorrow can wait.